Hello, it's Brad Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today I'm speaking with Solana, a very prominent startup that's really hitting the blockchain with speed, and we'll find out why. We have the CEO in the hot seat. His name is Anatoly Yakovenko. Anatoly, thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy.
Oh, thanks, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, mate. Now, as I said before, speed is an inherent feature. We'll find out why exactly, Solana as well. But let's start a little bit more with you. I had a bit of a read about your background. You're really strong when it comes to tech, particularly with operating systems. So give us a bit of a rundown on why you made the transition into blockchain, especially given that you want to improve the hardware situation.
Yeah, so I spent most of my career at Qualcomm kind of working on optimisations. If you ever had like an old CDMA flip phone, like a Motorola Razr, I was a core kernel engineer on the operating system that ran those things.
Mm-hmm.
So spent most of my technical career really like focusing on how do we make the, small pieces of code faster? How do we use all the resources available to us? And around 2017, we had this like big boom, and like Filecoin had this like crazy ICO. But I also, beyond that, like what really brought my attention to the space were folks were trying really crazy approaches to scaling, like DAGs, IOTA, like everything you can think of under the sun. People were really tackling this problem, and optimization and getting performance was something that I spent so much of my career on that I really started to think about it, in depth. And one day, as the legend goes, I had too much coffee and I was up till 4 in, and I had this kind of just like really high level idea that we can encode passage of time as data. So create a data structure that represents time passing.
Right. And that's quite a detailed sort of white paper. And if you'd like to know more, you can go into the Solana white paper. But we will explore this at a lay level today. But I wanted to talk to you a bit more on just the inherent value of scalability and performance, as you talk about in the context of layer one. Because as you alluded to, there's a lot of ideas and theories being thrown out there in that initial phase in 2017 with a plethora of white papers and sometimes just a whole bunch of bullshit too. But in the approach of layer one, there's real deal scenarios where they're trying to tackle this without having to do things like sharding or layer twos. So what sets you apart, do you think, when we talk about this time aspect?
So what really sets us apart is that we're scaling without sharding. If you have any idea what sharding is, intuitively you can think of it as like, you have Bitcoin and you have a bunch of miners. But what if you had 2 blockchains, like 2 Bitcoins, and you would split the miners to work on both, right? And now you have twice as much transactions per second. The problem is that you've actually split your security. You split all the mining nodes that are providing security to the network. And even if you try clever tricks to have them alternate, chains and things like that, at the end of the day, at any given moment, like the network is split. And that creates, one, security problems, but also, really difficult programming challenges. How do we actually move state from one chain to another? How do you ensure that, the information that you're receiving about the other blockchain is valid and true and secure? And it doesn't just happen that in your shard, some small group of nodes that just happen to all be in that shard start messing with the network.
Right.
So what really sets us apart is that we took on the challenge of scaling the network without sharding. So,
well, let's explore that a bit more though, Anatoly, because you deal with a proof of history. And when you talk about sharding, it's interesting because a lot of the pro-sharding projects, they talk about how they can reduce that computational pressure for the main chain. They talk about narratives of side chains, for example, or enabling more performance because one part or one a cluster can be more performant and not have to affect the rest. Now, it's interesting because you are tackling it as a whole. So talk us through how you do that, especially with regard to nodes in the context of the proof of history.
So yeah, our theory is like, screw all that, just dump all the computation in the network on one chain, and we'll figure out how to make it work.
Okay.
And really, like, so why we can do this is this idea of encoding passage of time as data. We call it proof of history because what it really constructs is almost like a water clock. Imagine like a clock that, you know, that's dripping water and the level rises. We do something very similar with data, like cryptographically generated data. And this data structure works as a clock before consensus. So if you remember, like, really, you know, early days wireless protocols, like, you know, World War I era radios, when people would transmit at the same time, if both people transmit over the same frequency, you get noise, right? Because they collide. So the first thing that people figured out is they synchronize a clock and then they take turns. And that allows the channel to support many more users. So your cell phone, you know, everything that we know about networks operates based on that principle. You know, cell phones have become far more complicated. They frequency hop and do all sorts of crazy tricks. But at the end of the day, this idea that for a particular moment in time, you acquire a piece of this common resource and only you own it, allows these networks to scale up.
And is that where your experience, your 13 years of experience in the operating systems, especially with mobile phones? I noticed that with the company called Qualcomm, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but you had a lot of experience specifically with mobile operating systems. Did you utilize a lot of that knowledge to bring across as you built the proof of history?
So the protocol is definitely based on high-level ideas out of TDMA, time division multiple access. At a very high level, instead of having block producers that randomly are selected, you know, what to produce a block, we schedule all of them at a fixed interval within this data structure. And that allows us to very quickly rotate through them and generate blocks at a high rate.
Okay. Now, are you at risk at all of centralization because you've removed the element of randomization in that process? And how many nodes have you, do you start off with as well?
So that is an awesome question. And I think that is like a question that we will find out empirically. So our theory is that, you know, let's say you have Bitcoin that produces a block every 10 minutes randomly, right? And you may have networks that produce blocks every 5 seconds. Our goal is to produce a block every 400 milliseconds. Or right now, we're actually, our testnet, you can go and run it, is set to 800 milliseconds, but we think 400 is possible. So imagine in 10 minutes, right, that's 600 seconds. We produce 1,200 blocks. That means 1,200 potential block producers are able to pick transactions, set order, and have input into the system. Versus Bitcoin, where it's only one. So
that's a lot faster.
Do you see a system that has 1,200, you know, users, like 1,200 participants having an input over 10 minutes to be more censorship resistant and more decentralized versus one where you have one every 10 minutes?
Right. And that's at test net level as well. So it's obviously, at the early stages, so it's possible that this can really improve. Now, one of the things that, has been a statement, from Solana for some time, I'm not sure if it still is that you are the fastest blockchain. Do you still stand by that, suggestion?
I don't know yet.
Right.
We'll see.
Okay.
I think, so hard challenges. I think we're the fastest permission network for sure. So in our permission deployment, where we basically don't rotate the leader, we can generate like 200,000 transactions per second. It's possible to go faster, but as soon as you introduce all the really difficult challenges involved around fault tolerance and distributed networks, our peak rates right now are somewhere between 50 to 80,000 TPS. Right. So it's kind of like up to you.
For sure. Are you still there?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay. I like having the dog. It means that you're human and you've got pets. Now, mate, I wanted to ask you as well with regard to the layer 1 and 2 discussion we had before, because one of the things that is explained in Solana is that you're a layer 1 security, or sorry, I'll retract that. You're a layer 1 system, with security built in, the blockchain type, but you also have layer 2 speeds. Now, I wanted to ask you in the context of all of these layer 2s that we do see, what do you mean by that, that discussion, that idea?
So we're just really being clever with our marketing. I think that what we're trying to say is that we have all the speed that you could imagine at a layer two. Like actually, I think sharded chains that are being proposed, their total capacity is going to be lower than our single shard. But we also don't sacrifice any security because we're still single shard, single fully replicated state machine that everyone that's validating the chain is validating the entire set.
Right.
And
that means also there's staking involved because you have that validation process.
Yep. Yeah. So right now we're actually starting to onboard validators, like external folks, participants, anyone that wants to basically run a node. So if you guys are thinking about this, please reach out to us. And really gearing up to kind of being, I don't know, maybe a more public release of the testnet to where we're testing it on live nodes across the world.
Right.
Versus just our internal.
I'm sure a lot of people are waiting for that kind of public, experience so they can engage a little bit more. And we'll talk about the nature of your transparency and the degree of it. But let's explore a little bit more about some of the key features as well we haven't discussed. Now, one of them is sub-second finality. You have that. Why is it important that you can, achieve the sub-second speeds?
I think you need, for applications to actually function with human timeouts, things need to occur sub-second. Like you can't expect humans to run a dApp and have a user interface that's blocked by, like six blocks of 10 minutes, right?
Right.
It's just too much time. Like those transactions may be fine for, like wire transfers and remittance or things like that, but not for any kind of decentralized application.
Right. So what of Bitcoin? What of these systems in play now where we see them as stores of value? At the very least, some of them want to progress to a more global transactional unit of account. So they are types of remittance as well, and they aren't so performant, as you know. So, are you concerned at all about that, given that you're moving in the direction, quite the opposite direction of trying to be sub-second?
No, like so maybe this is a contrarian opinion. I'm not even sure that proof of stake can be a store of value. Like I think the only defensible thing that proof of stake networks have is usage, like actual usage. If there's humans that depend on these networks and they, the humans input, their wealth into some transactions that are running over this, that is like the only defensible thing a proof of stake network has. Doesn't matter how many. Yeah, in my mind, it doesn't matter how many tokens are staked.
That's an interesting thing because it basically affords for a different conversation for the proof of work startups and those that are proof of stake by design, because obviously their interests or their motives perhaps may be different. And in your context, you're literally trying to make sure that you build a platform that's going to facilitate and optimize applications specifically.
Yep.
So it's really interesting that you make that distinction. So thanks for that. No one's ever actually mentioned that to me before as a CEO. Now, with regard to some other statements, this relates to the applications. One of the things that Solana has stated they want to do is be a professional deployment of centralized systems. I didn't quite understand why the centralized aspect was referenced there. So I thought maybe you could explain what that may imply.
Well, our goal is to really be as fast as you would expect out of, AWS. It's obvious that we can't just take, a giant application that, does deep learning and memory hogs and like does a bunch of stuff and run that on the blockchain, right? That's ridiculous.
Right.
What we can do is like take applications that actually depend on accounts and transactions and like state transitions, like games. Like I would say this covers probably 99% of most websites you interact with. And those can perform as well, as fast, and on demand in a decentralized way as you would expect out of a centralized system. And that's our goal. We really want to make it possible for users to build these like feature-rich applications without sacrificing performance, but still get all the benefits of decentralization.
Right, and obviously keeping the security by having the whole approach rather than the split approach.
Yeah.
Now, One of the things that's interesting too is we see the discussions now about gaming as just one example of use case, or we see finance, or we see all kinds of verticals. What's your position with regard to the current use cases as well, Anatoly, given that we see so many claims to fame with what blockchain can do? Do you think we're at the stage still where at layer one infrastructure, given that you're working so hard to make this possible, or do you think some of them are already ahead of the game and have the capacity now to really take it to the next level and build this new, for want of a better term, this new internet of data utilizing blockchain?
I think EOS has support for maybe a few hundred transactions per second.
Mm-hmm.
That's my understanding of it. I could be wrong. They could have made some upgrades.
So it's vastly different to yours.
Yeah, EOS is vastly different, and say what you will about EOS, but they actually ship code and it's live.
Right.
And that is a thing. Well, you can't really compare networks that aren't live to networks that are. We haven't seen uptake in usage that actually has demanded that much throughput yet. So we don't, I think there's a chicken and egg problem. We need high-speed networks for people to build rich applications that are, that users that are used to centralized applications have the exact same kind of look and feel and performance aspect.
Well, it's going to be interesting.
That's not possible yet.
It's going to be interesting to see how you do achieve that mass adoption of the applications. But obviously now you're still building the fundamentals. And some of those things, one aspect is the message flow. And trying to also split the bandwidth in that context. Can you talk us through the messaging and how important that's been, given that you are so experienced in building operating systems to, I guess, transform blockchain so that we can ensure that message flow does continue and strengthen as part of your design?
But message flow, do you mean how blocks are propagated in the network?
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you go back to our core innovation, this idea that we have this data structure that represents time. Imagine you're in an island somewhere and you find a bottle, there's a thumb drive in, and you plug it in, and you have this data structure that actually represents time passing. What is really key about this is that when you look at the structure, there's messages embedded into it, and you have this guarantee of when these messages occurred relative to each other. So in not only in order, but also in time. You can't really fake the real time passage. You actually have to, somebody somewhere ran a computer that generated this data. And just based on this data alone, you can compute the state of the network and what every node in the network is effectively, if they're available or not, if they're up or down, or their fail or not failed state. And this computation gives you a synchronized view of the network that everyone else can compute and that you don't have to talk to. So you haven't done any peer-to-peer messages. You haven't contacted anyone else. You just simply have this objective data structure.
I see.
So why that's important is that we've separated the data propagation, the block propagation, from actually having a view of the network, that none of our nodes really need to rely on direct messages. So we can actually transmit data as fast as possible. And the fastest way possible to do this on the internet is using techniques very similar to BitTorrent, where participants receive part of the data structure and then retransmit it to everyone else as fast as they can.
Right,
and that allows us.
That specifically is how you get performant, because it's a way around having to utilize the whole network to do a certain task.
Yeah, so we actually, our bandwidth usage actually improves with more nodes in the network, because now you have more peers that you can send data to that can retransmit. It's kind of like BitTorrent, where the more peers you have, right, the bigger the number of seeders, the faster the data goes.
Well, that's good for your design, for more usership and more adoption, and certainly more nodes. So what's the ambition with regard to the onboarding, nodes to the system for you?
As many as we can get, but I think so. Engineering wise, going beyond 100, it's hard to say there's a strong improvement towards fault tolerant. Like in an engineering level, more than 100 systems that are really distributed geographically, it's pretty hard for them to all fail at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this network, or I mean, I think the space in general really flourishes when you have, the more people you have contributing into it, the more nodes you have running, the higher decentralization you have. And I think those network effects really play in each other. So really, like, we're open to everyone that can participate. I mean, we've been open source from day one, so
Yes, you
anyone
have.
at any time can go steal our code.
Yeah, and I've read about that, and you've never ever had an issue with the risks of appropriation or even copying code, because you always said right from the outset, it's all about being pragmatic. It's all about just getting the job done. And if people are that worried about doing the appropriation, so be it. But you wanted to be part of the action play rather than the theory. Now, it's interesting because, as we talk about these things, we still hear these terms of TPS, and we have these big names of a million transactions per second. Now, what is your take on this, given that you've also published clear statements? One of them was 710K TPS on 1 gigabit. These kind of things were finite at the time. What's your take on the specifics of TPS, given that it's just one aspect of the integrity of your system?
It's actually a great measurement of how many things a network can process per second. You can think of it as like cycles per second on a CPU. It's very hard. Like if you actually deploy even a multi-sharded solution that can do millions of things per second, it's a technical achievement, right? That's hard to beat. Like people worked, for years to get Cassandra or like MySQL on AWS to do a million things per second. There was a lot of really bright engineers working on that. So I think measuring those numbers is an important metric to have, but it's not a be all end all. At the end of the day, there's clear differences between a sharded and non-sharded system, and clear differences between, like, if you have a one signed message that does a bunch of things, like, so the people can kind of fudge those things around, but still, but you can clearly see the difference in performance between something like Ethereum, where it does 7 transactions per second, versus somebody like us that on the open network can do like maybe 50 or 80,000. And our theoretical limit is 710,000, but it's going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of engineering to get there. Like,
Well, let's talk about that openly. Given you're an open protocol, let's just use that terminology. Now, you broached Ethereum, and I think that was a brave move to do, because they do have a very limited speed right now. They were one of the first, to enter into the space, perhaps to their detriment, because people like you are moving forward with a permissionless system as well, with the plan to also have these smart contracts, so the plan to have applications. Are you a major threat to Ethereum, given that they're trying their very best to solve scalability at the layer 2 solution? They're trying to fix things with Plasma, with
our open source Apache 2.0 code is going to crush them. The reality is that, like, we're experimenting at a particular design space. Anything that we do, they can readily adopt, and vice versa. So I don't see us as competitors. I think Ethereum has had tremendous success, and are moving slowly because of that success, because they really don't want to ruin what they have, and that's the right thing to do. You got to give them time to actually deliver a product that doesn't break.
I just wanted to interrupt for a moment, though, because I can totally understand what you're saying, but given the vast difference between your TPS, your capability, your scalability potential, and Ethereum, it begs the question, why not move a bit faster? Why not really try and expedite the process to keep up with Solana?
I think the danger for them is if they screw up, the bugs could be catastrophic to the network. Right. It's an open network, an open accounting system with billions of dollars at stake.
Is it a catch-22 though? Because fundamentally, don't they need the dApps, the applications? And aren't you going to essentially take the market share because you're going to be so much more performant?
I hope so. I hope we take some of it.
Right. Well, I like the confidence. I like the confidence.
I mean, that's our goal, right? But I think at the end of the day, as these networks mature, we're attacking a particular design space and they're attacking it from a totally different direction. And there's going to be applications that are really perform better on some network or the other. I think you would be foolish to think that there's going to be one design that wins everything. There might be
Sure.
one design that captures a lot of the value, but because that happens to be the one application that is the most important one in blockchain. We don't
Right.
know what that is yet. But
Well, if we look at the last few decades, we've seen when there's been innovative technology, there's been some that have really risen to the top. Google is one great example. Facebook is another in that centralized frame. Now, do you think, given the influx in blockchain startups, that we'll see that same sort of narrative play out, where we'll just see the surfacing of a few excellent solutions? Or do you think that, there's space for all of the, a vast number to make it through and contribute to an ecosystem that is still very nascent?
I mean, I think the very interesting thing is in the space is that it's so open source friendly. I
Mm-hmm.
think outside of maybe Hashgraph is the only closed source project that is like saying we're going to stay closed source that I'm aware of. I don't know if Thunder is or not, but because of that nature, I'm not sure we'll see the same things happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because we're
this
literally
kind of
flipping the
open,
conversation on its head.
yeah, like I mean, you never, in every open source kind of build company, we don't see like a huge player besides Red Hat, but they were really the first one, right? And really the only the only large one. Um, and I don't know if it's because open source is just harder to monetize and you can't build a moat around it, um, or because the nature of it is to kind of get around, like it fills the niche that big companies can't, right?
Right.
Because it's a tool that everyone can adopt and use to their own needs.
Got
And
it.
then it becomes, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about you in that context, because it was a great analogy with Linux to Red Hat. Now, it's one thing to have a really successful open source protocol that hopefully the globe will use, but it's another to survive, Anatoly, and you're the
Yeah.
CEO. How on earth are you going to do that? What's your strategy that you're going to build in so that you can also benefit financially from the protocol?
Well, I think the tokens and kind of like this model of where you have a resource that really fundamentally governs the operating system
Mhm.
that's running, like the code, as having value, is really interesting because it's an opportunity for open source projects to capture as much value as like Microsoft did, right?
Right.
You know, if you really believe that, 10, 20 years from now, there's going to, the world's financial system is going to run on crypto, on some cryptographic blockchain, those chains might be worth $1 trillion. Like, I don't think that's ridiculous to think. If you think of really the whole world's financial system to be
Mm.
powered by these technologies, like a single open market for every transaction, right? Every stock trade, everything occurs on the same chain, right? That's going to be a massively valuable thing.
Mhm.
Um, that's the
So,
opportunity. That's what I can sell to
got it.
investors.
So are you, that's a good point. So are you reliant on the value of that utility token? Because I'm trying to
Yep.
get to understand, are you also looking at building your own applications which will have their own inherent value as well? Because many blockchains do that. Or are you solely just really trying to build this, what is fundamentally a business? It might be open source, but certainly still trying to build this up so that you can offer this technology to the world, but you're
We're
reliant on that token.
we're fundamentally tied to the value of the token that's in the permissionless network.
Got
Like
it.
our company, everything around us, all our employees, is
Mhm.
built on that.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about then the fundamental point of all of this, and that is proof of use case, proof of application. Talk us through that as the CEO. What's in the pipeline? What evidence is there empirically to tell us that there is a point to all of this?
Um, I think that's like the $1 million question right now for any
Right.
network.
Right.
We have a few partnerships. We haven't done like a big partnerships announcement yet. But the last numbers I saw out of Coinbase was that they estimate there's about 32 million wallets at the end of 2018. So if
Mhm.
you think of like the population of the world plus the population of the internet, it's like 3, 4 billion. then there's 32 million wallets, and not every human, right? Every wallet doesn't mean every human, right? That's the addressable market space. I think reality is that like it's just too early to talk about like runaway use cases.
Okay, well, I won't run away with them, but let's pull it back and still have the discussion, because you certainly know more than you're telling me. Now, you know, conversations with regard to interest from the business sector, for example, or even any benefactors, those who can transition from current models and utilize, you know, something like you, just as Linux did in you know, the time gone by. Are you currently discussing anything with any companies and partners in how
definitely.
they can work with you?
So folks that are actually going to ship seem to be in the identity payment space, one way or the other. Even if it's IoT, kind of at the end of the day, what they want out of the IoT device is identify it and then give it a micropayment.
Right.
Or with humans, right? It's like identify the human, whether it's like a specific feature of the human that you want to identify, and then have them pay. Those use cases, I think, are the ones that are going to ship this year, probably next year.
Right. And do you think they do their shop around with all the different layer one solutions that are out there, all the offerings? Do you think that they do that comparative and contrastive analysis and then come to Solana because you are essentially proving through your testnet that you are arguably one of the most, if not the most performant right now?
The folks that care about performance are the ones that are price sensitive. So with IoT, it means that they want to do, you know, potentially millions of transactions, and they just can't afford the 10 cent per transaction fees on Ethereum.
Right. Well, what's your price? Because that's another feature of yours, is that you're very low cost.
So capacity, you know, fundamentally, if you just think about how much each chain like generates in revenue per second, you can divide that by its TPS, and you get an estimate of the price per transaction, right? Okay. So for us, if we can do 80,000 transactions per second, and Ethereum can only do 7, we are about, you know, 10,000 times cheaper.
Okay, well, that's really substantial. And when we just, you know, when you consider it now, the developers as well, Anatoly, that's one of your strong points. There's no question. You've been pretty quiet as a team, really focused on the technology, focused on the code. You have a strong Discord and strong developer interest. How's everything going from the GitHub and beyond to ensure that this continues to build as an ecosystem of developers to grow the ecosystem of Solana?
So we have a very alpha set of demos that kind of demonstrate the APIs and how you can interact with the chain, and we're building out a really full-featured SDK. I think it's very likely that the focus of this SDK is going to be built around interfacing and interacting with external blockchains. Mm-hmm. So we have I think an opportunity with our performance to help folks that have deployed an Ethereum, have even ICO'd an Ethereum, to actually start executing their code on Solana while maintaining the governance and like the settlement of their token on Ethereum.
Well, that's powerful, given that there's such a strong community in Ethereum, for example. And you also have a really strong relationship with other blockchains, I've noticed as well, or even startups that are emerging now. And then there's the languages, you know, this cross-compatibility aspect. Do you want to talk us through some of them and how you can apply? I know you're focused on Rust as one, but how valuable is this ability to have this flexibility inbound with different blockchains that are there, such as Ethereum?
I think, well, Ethereum wrote their own language. That's one of the things that tell you to never to do it. And it's like computer science is do that last. And I think they've actually made a lot of great strides in language development. And because they were so early to the market, it was probably the right thing to do for them to just, you know, get it done instead of adapting more complex systems. Mm-hmm. But a lot of folks are really focused on WASM. So we have a bytecode that is not WASM, but is designed around high performance, but it's using the exact same toolchain, LLVM. So any language that compiles to LLVM can actually execute on the same network.
So are you talking to some of the Web3, 3.0 parties as well? When we talk about Cosmos, for example, Polkadot, you know that they're all moving in that direction with WASM, with WebAssembly. Is it something where you're considering integrating and cross-collaborating with other blockchains in the future, such as those that are in that space of Web 3.0?
So we are So bytecode is just a really specific part of the entire stack.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the bytecode, we're gung-ho about Web3. Like, I mean, my view is the browser is the best application platform because you have the open internet, right? You have the bazaar, right? Versus
Right.
like app stores, we have a kind of a single place where to go get something. So, but we're kind of taking a technical risk in terms of what we're building, because we're really focused on this idea that the things that are executing on chain are going to be small enough to fit in the GPU.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so our goal is to actually execute contracts on GPUs. The reason for this is because we're not sharding. So now we're dealing with how do we scale the cheapest way possible, how much compute is available to the contracts running on chain.
Mm-hmm.
And the cheapest number of cores per dollar you can buy is GPUs. So for $700, you get 4,000 CUDA cores versus 4 Intel cores.
Right, which is serious economy when we did the comparison.
Right. So because we really want to be the cheapest, fastest blockchain in the world, we really want to allow developers to run code on GPUs, which
Mm-hmm.
means they'll have the lowest price, I think, out of anyone. And
Right.
that means we can really blossom. But outside of that, our stack will be fairly compatible with everything else.
Guys, as you can see, we had to continue with Anatoly's phone because we had a bit of a battery issue, but we'll continue on. So Anatoly, I wanted to ask you about DEXs because I noticed that that's also a value proposition or value add for Solana. How is it relevant? Why are you interested in how DEXs can facilitate?
I think decentralized exchanges are like maybe one of the most interesting applications in the space right now. Because they're really the core of this like new financial the new financial like kind of promise of blockchain. And our value add there is really, I think, performance is a key component to a great DEX. Like if you have block confirmations that are sub-second, 800 milliseconds, that means that trades can occur a lot faster. Confirmations of like price changes can occur a lot faster. Mm-hmm. And those things add to the usability of the decentralized exchange. From our perspective, that's a great use case for us to onboard, because if we succeed there, then algorithmic trading will kind of eat up all the capacity we can give it. And that means that we have users, that create value, right, by using our chain. That's really our goal, right? I think, as I've said before, I think usage is the only defensible thing that any network can have.
Right, and that's what we want to all see more of, to be honest. Yeah. All the speculators, all of the retail investors, literally every party, we want to see more of that use case and more proof of it. Now, with regard to your roadmap, that also implies more proof as well. You mentioned test nets now in the making. You're literally doing that. But what's the plan over the course of, let's focus on this year? How are you planning to build towards the mainnet? And when is that planned?
So our network is basically almost ready to mainnet. Really working on like the polish, like integration with wallets, with hardware management systems like for keys, onboarding validators, working through the DevOps, stuff like that. We think that by the end of the summer, that will be done. And we're planning on doing our version of Game of Stakes. We're calling it Tour de Sol. Right, which is because we're cycling nerds.
Right.
So
okay.
if you want to participate, just go reach out to us on Discord. That's really fairly open, like everything else that we do. And I think when the network is kind of ready and stable, we'll flip the switch and call it mainnet. And our hope is that it'll happen somewhere around DEFCON 5, which is in October.
So when's that? Just to be specific. So DEFCON 5, when is that planned?
DEFCON 5 is Ethereum's kind of big developer event, and that's first week of October.
Okay, so we're talking literally about Q3, moving into Q4.
Yeah. No, not hard deadline, because it's really going to be based on the stability of the network once it's booted. There's unknown unknowns, but we feel fairly confident that kind of the engineering challenges that we'll have are fairly are solvable. Like,
right. Now, here's a tough one for you, and I do apologize to have to ask this question, but it is for the retail investors who are possibly keen on, taking part in interacting with your token at some stage. Now, when you talk about Q3, Q4 as a possibility of a mainnet, typically what we see in every blockchain is a listing before that. As an ERC20, are you talking to exchanges? Are you taking this seriously? Are you going to list?
So we're not an ERC20.
You're not going to be at all?
No.
So straight to native token.
We're straight to mainnet token. In terms of listing, as a US-based company, we are talking to folks that can work within the US regulatory environment. And we'll see how that works out.
Wow. So are you concerned about that at all, given that there's such a dearth of interest from exchanges to adopt and take on board native tokens because of integration issues? An example is Arweave. I know the team very well, and they are excellent by design, but struggling, to get the attention of some of the exchanges because they're a native token.
We'll see. I think to build a bridge that is trustless and permissionless is pretty hard. So us as a company, I think it'd be pretty hard for us to do and still call it decentralized, right? Mm-hmm. But I think exchanges can do that, like folks that have already kind of that are already non-decentralized, like things where if you trust Binance and they build a bridge, that's a very easy thing for them to do. And they would probably build
a nice little plug there, a nice plug as well, because obviously they built out their DEX. We see IDEX, another one. We're seeing others come forth. There's also Switcheo, that's a relatively unknown decentralized exchange as well. Are you thinking more in that sense of that kind of collaboration? Again, that narrative of DEX, we're seeing Nash as one that's really coming forward, a security-based system as well. So are you confident that some exchanges will pick you up because of the fact that you are a legit coin and that you are your own native token to do something real?
I don't even know if I can comment on this stuff without talking to my lawyers.
Right. Okay.
That's the problem.
That's why I love asking these questions. So it's okay. I mean, I really appreciate that you can't ask. I understand you can't answer everything, but it's good to know though that you're a native token. B, you're very confident that you have real potential and real use case. And C, you want to be clear that right from the go-get, you're not trying to make a token swap at any point. You're just going to be straight into the mix.
Yeah.
Okay. What about your raise? This is going to be equally challenging. Now, you didn't do an ICO, Anatoly.
No, we're funded, venture funded. We've done Reg D raises, which you can look on the SEC website and search for Solana Labs and find them. I think kind of pitching this kind of thing to retail investors is pretty hard because it's so risky. So our goal is to launch a permissionless decentralized network, mm-hmm. and have that be, the underlying token and the utility of it be what's really driving like adoption and the use cases.
Right.
And our participation.
And we all want that for you, obviously, bro. So we want that for all top tech. But here's the tough question. Now, if you have big investors like, for example, 500 Startups, NGC, the list, Chris McCann is involved there, Cosmos, potentially Blockwall. Now, these investors, typically they do invest in what they deduce as top tech. Some would argue they also have invested in some that haven't turned out so well, but they have invested with substantial capital. Now, one of the things I want to ask you is, are you at all concerned about the risks inherent with VCs, whether they be these or others, in dumping the value of your token because they're trying to capitalize as capitalists, essentially as VCs, because of lockups? And what are the lockup terms for these big investors?
So we haven't really published our token model yet.
Okay. Are you planning to?
Whether they're going to dump or not, I think our goal with the token model when we release it is that everyone has a fair shot at being first. So really, I think when you'll see it, you'll see that us, the company, the foundation, all the investors are kind of really depend on adoption and the network continuing and running in a permissionless, decentralized way. And everyone that is early participant will actually have the earliest tokens, like from the get-go. And
Okay,
everybody else that's invested will have the slow release schedule.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense, because in that context, basically what you're saying is that everyone who wants to take part in the ecosystem, wants to use it, apply it, build, they can go for it, but there will be a vesting process for those investors over time, and that'll all be transparent to fit with the model of Solana that's typically been transparent from the go-get with regard to code.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
give us some dates though, Anatoly. Come on, let us know when you're going to give us some dates of when you're going to release this information so we can learn more.
I think by September 1st, you guys will know everything.
Okay, all right, so you're making us hold out until then. And what about the complexities of legality, especially in the US? You alluded to this before. It's definitely what you have deemed as a grey cloud for blockchain generally. What's being done with the conversations, if there's any, between Solana and the authorities? You know, are you working with the SEC, CFTC, or anything at all to ensure that you're compliant, you're on board,
we have a legal team that's making sure we're compliant, and I think my belief is that the authorities do believe in decentralization and permissionless, because it reduces fraud, and as long as we are committed to that, I think we are on the right path.
Right. Now, another tough question, IEO. Obviously, you're focused on native token. What are your thoughts on what we've seen emerge in the last few months with the hype of IEOs, with the kind of attention they brought to blockchain, led by some of the top crypto exchanges as well? Is it something that piques your interest for Solana?
IEOs, I think it's an interesting way to distribute the token to the communities of those exchanges. And I think that's an important part of how these networks start.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's just a new way to actually get the token out to a lot of people.
Right. Got it. Well, it'll be interesting to see, because, you know, you as the CEO with regard to IEOs, to see how this plays out. And also just want to interrupt and say, it's great to hear some kids in the background. It shows you're a real person in a real life, and, you know, you're there with, like you mentioned before, off camera.
Yeah.
You know, there's things happening in our lives. So, you know, I do appreciate that this is part of your, you know, your daily routine, and you're taking time out of your day to do this interview. Now, mate, one of the things I want to ask you before you go is publications. There's not a great deal of publications in the last few months with regard to Solana. I had a look at all the 2008 publications, and they've been pretty good. Why have you been so quiet? Why aren't you releasing too much information for us to read?
We just had to build it and get it done. Like, I think when crypto winter happened, we, you know, I don't know if we had many other choices of what to do, but we really decided to, okay, let's make sure we actually execute while we have the opportunity to do so while it's quiet. And that's what we did. Like the whole team, the whole company really put a lot of focus and effort into making sure that everything we promised is delivered. And we did that over the last, 6 to 9 months.
So will you start to ramp up the publication and also PR?
For sure. We want to reach out to folks that love the space and love great tech, and have them, take a look at it and participate. And if you want to run a validator, that's a really easy, simple way to actually participate and add to the decentralization of the network.
Got it. Now, what's the best step for someone who does want to go out and learn how to run a node and obviously do that? What is it, through Discord, or what's the best process for them to get in touch with you guys?
Go on our website, jump on Discord. All the documentation's available on GitHub, so please go and go use it.
Got it. So what about future collaborations as well, with other blockchains? Are you talking with any right now in that context? Many of them, you've been to many events. Certainly you are in the conversations with the top tier teams as well.
I think
in terms of technical collaboration, like everything we're doing is in the open. So we really like the flow of ideas and adoption to happen that way, in the open source way. To me, that's super important. I think my favorite sharding solution is Near, even though we're maybe opposite design.
I love Near.
Design-wise, and I love those guys. They're super awesome.
I have a soft spot for them. You know, I've known them since they started, and Ilya and Alex, they just, you know, the next level. They're not really near. They are there. It's so funny they're named that, because they certainly have the academic and technical skills to take that to the next level with sharding. So it is interesting that you're a proponent of sharding and yet you're not yourself. Now, I wanted to ask you just one more thing, and that is with regard to the crypto space generally. Now, right now we're in this very convoluted space. It's really complex. It's really, you know, nascent, as we talked about, but there's a lot of what you could all say is crony crypto capitalism. And there's also a lot of BS on the blockchain as well. There's a lot of stuff going on, not just all the good stuff. What's your position? What's your observation? What are you thinking about what's going on in this melee, in this mix of tech and speculation and profiteering?
I mean, like any space, I think, where people think they can get rich will attract everybody. The important thing is just focus on the tech, focus on the actual use cases and usage. Like if you really focus on like, where do we add value to the world, a lot of the stuff will kind of fade away.
Right.
That's the important part. Like I think these technologies and these systems are just, it's something that would have been science fiction when I was in college. Like imagine building a computer that cannot be shut down, that's global, right? That's science fiction.
And tokenized, incredibly tokenized. So one thing that I have learned from this conversation is that you really see the value of proof of work continuing on, and you also see the imperatives of proof of stake for being something, you know, to build an ecosystem to onboard applications. So it's been an absolute privilege talking to you as the CEO of Solana. You've made it very clear that not only are you addressing scalability head on, but you are very confident that you have a blockchain that's going to do the job. And now the task is to get those onboarded, to literally get those applications to really evidence empirically that this team and this tech have got what it takes to go that step beyond into the real world. So Anatoly, on behalf of all the people who wanted to know more about Solana, thank you, mate, for taking the time out of your day. I know you're really busy. You're at home right now with the kids. And I thank you again for being so detailed in what you're doing right now to build into the next era of technology, really change the game, flip the centralization on its head and allow people to benefit from blockchain.
Oh, Brad, it's been a pleasure to be here. You're amazing, and this was a really fun conversation.
You're welcome, mate. And it's been, honestly, it's been really fun for me as well. And I hope we can catch up again and just break down a bit of Solana in bite-sized chunks, because today it was just one big fun interview.
Cool. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.